love and brutality. I walk the road of justice and morality.
Hello, and welcome to another wonderful episode with the One Great Work Warriors. I'm here with Jerry, Brandon, Jim, Derek, and Crypt Rick. And this week we came to you with a special episode about some of the more difficult topics that we run into being human beings in this realm. And that's dealing with ethics, morality, and values. And this is a topic I've brought up because I've noticed over and over in various conversations and presentations I've watched that all of these words get used interchangeably and they can be somewhat confusing. And I find myself, for the sake of like thinking carefully, like using the trivium, for instance, it's important to gather our grammar first. And then that way we can then think, what is the logic, from this grammar that I've gathered? And we can go back and forth and have a way to compare something, and it's the same something that we're all comparing. And that's the difficulty with words, because words are not always, there's not always just one ironclad definition. There's a modern usage of a word, and through time, language, religion, words get shifted ever so bit over the years, in different writings. So we're always trying to go back and look at the etymology of words, try to figure out where these words come from, and then what's the essence of their meaning, so that we're using, at least if we're all using the same word, that we're all using the same definition or meaning when we're talking, or at least we're able to define the difference. So in order to get this, jumpstart this conversation, and I needed some clarity in my own head, I went on four different sources. And I drew from the Oxford English Dictionary, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, and the Cambridge Dictionary, and the Collins English Dictionary. And I put them all on a graph, the definitions from these, their first definition, their main definition of each of these words, right next to each other, so I can compare and contrast. And then below that, I took the etymologies from four different etymology derivation sources and put them next together. And what's interesting is that this process of putting together this graph really illuminated some things for me, that part of the reason that these words get confused and mixed up is because the definitions do the same thing. And for instance, when we look at the Oxford English Dictionary, it defines values as principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life. So you look at Collins English Dictionary on values, and it says your values are the beliefs you think are important in the way you live and work. So even between those two definitions, there's kind of a big gap or difference. When you look at ethics, I'm just picking two for to keep it brief here. The branch, this is talking about ethics from Oxford, the branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles, moral philosophy. So values was the judgment of what's important in life, and ethics was the branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles, the philosophy. So, that makes it really hard to tell the difference from my point of view, the way Oxford's defining it. Collins English Dictionary called ethics the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or conducting of an activity. So moving on to morality, Oxford English Dictionary called morality principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong, or good and bad behavior, a particular system of values and principles of conduct, especially one held by a specified person or society. And then back to the Collins English Dictionary, morality is the belief that some behavior is right and acceptable and that other behavior is wrong. So I was kind of frustrated, honestly, to look closer at all these definitions, because I was looking for something that wasn't really there. And that is that most of the definitions do keep this in the realm of beliefs. They use the term beliefs to almost make it sound like we just decide as people what's moral and what's good and what's ethical, and then how we apply it into our life is, how we express our values, our behavior, right? But when you look back at the actual etymology of these words, all these dictionaries that I looked them up, all four of them virtually agree um, very directly with. They use pretty much the same terminology. Values comes from valere and valeo, which is either to be strong or to be worthy or to be worth, to have worth. Um, Ethics comes from ethikos, mainly, is where they all point to, which pertains to morals or moral character. Or ethos can even mean custom or habit. And then across the board, they all say that morality comes from mos, which means custom or habit, which is basically very similar, almost the same exact thing as ethos or ethikos, custom or habit across the board for the derivation of morality. So just kind of laid down some foundational brickwork there of what I found out there in the modern dictionaries online. And I hope that helps get the conversation started. And I'd like to pass it along to Derek. You up next?
Yeah, sure. Chris, thank you so much for breaking that down, brother man. And yeah, it's interesting and a shame how many adults can get these simple, basic words and concepts and kind of, derail from, these actual meanings. I mean, but that's kind of classic with a lot of words, kind of like government and, anarchy, that kind of stuff. But uh, as far as what we see in the mainstream and what we're kind of used to seeing these words like in certain situations or in the commonplace of like business ethics, people go to school and college to learn about that a little bit, and lo and behold, kind of like the HR is up in there, have these PR public relation campaigns to, hey, these corporate entities, we have, good business ethics, we're doing these things, yet, what are they doing behind the scenes and what do they get away with? So it really, there's contradictions with these things. And for me, looking back and trying to like grade these three terms, I see morality as, the most high. It is something that, especially if we're, going to be distinguishing between, objective morality, which, we can kind of say, universal morality in a sense, if we're talking about universal law, cosmic law, natural law, karmic law, right? And yeah, it's not this karmic thing where, oh, something bad's going to happen to us if we do X, Y, Z, whatever. It's if we look at this reality, the objective reality, right, Chris? You'll touch on that later. But if we look at these things in terms of energy, and Manly P. Hall talks about this brilliantly, but in a nutshell, it's kind of like being able to really do an exoteric and esoteric examination of energy and how certain things, the actions that we do and have upon others, how that can disrupt the electromagnetic integrity of, another person, even an animal, even, Mother Nature, that kind of stuff. So looking on that, we also need to understand that, every life is its own, property. Those are property rights. And that kind of was what you guys touched on in the initial conversation of, what is a right, I believe. So, yeah, we do not have the right to, violate another person's property, another person's being, right? So that would be an immoral moral action. Dead and simple. So we have that, and then ethics. So to lay out the three and how I see them, like, yeah, we have the universal on the macro cosmic scale of, that overlies everything that's non-man-made. It's just there, right? We have to either align to it, right, or not. And there are a lot of ethics, which is the lower macrocosm, that do align to that, and it's implemented throughout societies. Oh, you can do this and that, and religions and everything. And I'm going to tie in some things in the second round in regards to the tarot. But yeah, and then values are more on the microcosm. I see, as far as individually, how people value life and reality. And yeah, you go on a date, right? Hey, how's it going? What are your values? What do you like to do? All this stuff. And that's a really mundane example, but what are the common people say when they're talking about values, right? So yeah, not gonna get ahead of myself, but yeah, y'all heard this common thing people say now, like, oh man, that shit was based, and so, like, what are we basing ethics and values on, and what is morality based on, right? But morality is based in truth, right? And that is what a right is. It is correct. So if you put those in the column of all these things line up, if you go into Mark Passio's natural law seminar, he breaks it down brilliantly. And Chris Nelson at evolveconsciousness.org, he's got like a gazillion hours about this stuff with umpteen infographics and all that jazz. Much respect, yo. So yeah, I'm just gonna pass it off right now. So who wants to take the mic, yo? JJ. I know Brandon's gonna anchor the first round, but yeah. Crip Rick, I know you've been thinking about stuff too, but
well, yeah, I can definitely go. I mean, it's interesting. I'm glad that Chris. I love the way Chris broke down the definitions because, and I'm happy that a lot of the definitions that he was saying ties into the discussions I was having. I was telling you guys before we started recording that the last couple of days I've had groups of friends over, and this is what we got into. It was specifically for this, was to talk about these topics and these words, and it was very interesting how we kind of were bouncing back and forth, which is what I thrive in. I thrive in that environment where I'm in a group and just bouncing things off of each other and talking about it. And it was really interesting that a lot of what the definitions that Chris said and what you just said are very similar. And so I wrote down a few of the things out because I enjoy asking people that maybe don't know Mark Passio's work or some of the other people we talk about. They don't study it. So it gives me a gauge of what the everyday person thinks on what they think the definitions mean and stuff. So I find that really interesting. And to me, it gives me a good, like I said, gauge of where people's at. And so when we were talking about values, what they were mostly saying was that that you determine your values based on your morals. And the thing about values is that they can change many times over your life. And I found that interesting because I think when I think of values, I think and I think everybody's values are different. Some people value money, some people value family, some people value honesty, some people value truth. And I think if you go around and ask people, you're going to get a lot of different answers of what they value. So that was kind of what we were talking about in this group, was that values change and can change. Whether in circumstances, whether you have a child or you get married, I think values is was a big part of our discussion of when, at least for my discussion I was having with people. And so I found it really interesting that what they were saying about values. And then when we got into morals, it was kind of like they were saying your morals are determined by the people around you, especially from the time you're basically born. So you got, who do you have? You have your family, you got friends, you got teachers, you got just basically the environment around you. And I tend to agree that your morals are starting to be shaped by that. So this is a really important key time to start basing these morals, these proper morals, at a very young age, because I think it's going to really shape who the person is. So I found that really interesting too, that we got into a lot about morals, and if your moral compass is off, it's going to definitely affect your values, and it's going to affect your ethics. Everything is going to be compromised because we're dealing with right and wrong. in a lot of the cases. So if your moral compass is off from the get-go, then you got problems. And we talk about that. And then finally, because I don't want to go on too long, I do apologize. But ethics was a really interesting one. And this is, what I came to ethics, and I'm thinking about what I thought of ethics is how you handle yourself in any given situation. And it's part of your character. So when I think of ethics, I'm thinking, what are you willing to do to get to your goal? And are you willing to compromise your values, your morals? Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done? And I think that's where a lot of then, and I was saying to you guys too, like it all like the Venn diagram, like Chris is going to explain, it all kind of bleeds together. These three things really start intersecting with each other, and that's what I started realizing over these last couple of days of discussions is we start really bleeding together. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought that ethics, like that's what I always took ethics as, is what are you willing to do to get the job done? Are you willing to stand on your morals and not compromise and stand firm no matter the repercussions of it? Or are you willing to sell somebody down the river or hurt somebody to get what you want? So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. So I'll pass it on. That's my thoughts.
Yo, yeah, thanks, Rick. Yeah, like you guys have all been saying, like the first thing when I started looking into these definitions and everything is my head started spinning, and I was like, this is just like spaghetti, right? Or word salad, you know? And something I came across, and I kept hearing you say it, Rick, and I know that you know about morality being objective and all that, but you kept saying morals. And like I was thinking like this subject is ethics, values, and morality, but it was like if it was going to be more congruent, it would be ethics, values, and morals. So then I was like, oh, let me look up morals like on its own. And then that kind of just like morality is about what's right and wrong, but morals is about beliefs. But if morality is objective, there are no beliefs, right? So that was like what's getting really frustrating for me was that if you told anyone like to go like look into this, like tell me the difference between ethics, values, and morals, they're gonna kind of just come away with it's just pretty much all the same thing, you know, like because they all kind of like have belief in there, and then like there's moral values. So I think like that's kind of what you're getting really trying to say is moral values, but people say, oh, like what are your morals? And then it's like beliefs, right? So like that was, if anything, like doing this was getting frustrating for me because it was making it seem even more hopeless that because there's so many people that don't even think about morality at all, but they live in this more relativistic belief system. But then I started like this search kind of led me through to like all this kind of moral philosophy on YouTube and that. And then it's like you got these people actually debating, you know, objective morality. And there's like these philosophers who are just totally, you know, saying that it's not. So that's just, it's frustrating. But so that, I was looking at the difference between morality, which is like this study of right and wrong, or just it's universal right and wrong, objective morality, moral, which means right. If you look it up, it means right. But morals, you put an S on it and it just becomes about like beliefs, which like fucks the whole thing up when you put an S on it, you know? Because
Right.
if it's right, then like what are your morals? Then like then it becomes your beliefs about it. So as far as ethics is concerned, I definitely have seen that it's like a lot of times in organizations, like organizations have their code of ethics. Like you know, I'm been into the world of permaculture. Permaculture has the 3 ethics: people care of the earth, and the third one has to do with limiting consumption. And it gets very controversial, and people don't agree on that one, which is something I see also, like where I work. There's a land ethics that not everyone's following, stuff like that. I see where even when organizations put ethics forth, they don't even follow them, or they don't even really understand them. Well, and values is I feel like values is the easiest one to separate, because like that definitely could be based in beliefs, where we spoke about this, where one man's trash can be another man's treasure. It's like there's values are definitely subjective. Also, ethics is, I've seen a lot in the definition. It's the philosophy of morality. So it's like morality is the foundation of all this. It's not like um, morality is the philosophy of ethics. You know, um, I don't know. I'm getting confused, but um, so yeah, there's all these kinds of things when it comes to values too. Maybe I'll get into that later, but I'll pass it to Jerry.
Thank you, guys. Having a bit of lag, so I'm going to close some tabs real quick. All right, 5 minutes. So I'm just going to approach this from the top. So I'm going to define morality or morals, the etymology. Yeah, I'm just going to search to see what it says. Etymology, moral. See what it says. It says ADJ dot mid 14th century, associated with or characterized by right behavior. I don't even know if I have to go further, but I'll finish the sentence. Also associated with or concerning conduct or moral principles, good or bad. This is from etymonline.com. Like, I'm going to keep reading because it has something to do with ethics. So, from Old French moral, 14th century, or C. And directly from Latin moralis, proper behavior of a person in society, end quote, literally, open quote, pertaining to manners, end quote, coined by Cicero de Fato, I. To translate Greek ethiko, see ethics, from Latin mos, genitive moris, one's disposition, in plural, mores, customs, manners, morals, a word of uncertain origin, perhaps sharing a pi root with English mood. So, like, I didn't see anything about belief there. And this is like where discussions like this are good to have, because if I were to look up the dictionary word of morals, I'm sure it says beliefs, but I have to take caution with that, like align my perspective to the truth to be able to understand the word. So I agree, morals, like as far as I understand it, it's knowing right versus wrong. And then wrong is essentially stealing from someone else or other people. And that has to do with the real deadly 7 sins, which is murder, theft or robbery, coercion, lying, deception. What else? Damn, I'm on the spot now. Yeah, essentially trespassing, And there's others which I can't think of for some reason, but it's basically don't steal, and those are the morals, and that's the foundation. Those are the principles. And I do want to read the principles etymology. Oh, I typed in something wrong. And let's see. All right, principle, late 14C dot. Origin, source, beginning. So it's the beginning, it's the foundation. And then ethics, I did not apply the trivia method to these definitions, so I do apologize. I'll do better during the next roundtable discussion. But like Brandon writes in his descriptions in his videos, don't believe anything I'm saying. Like, do the research for yourself. But if I had to explain what ethics means, I would say it's like a branch of the philosophy of morals. But then there's these questions too where it's like, can something be ethical but immoral? You know? And like a scenario I'm thinking of is, because the way I understand ethics from a course I took from someone in autonomy was, ethics is essentially a win-win-win scenario, and anything other than that is unethical, because, or maybe just a win-win, because if I do something for someone else that's good but it harms me, that's stupid. If I do something that's good for me but it's bad for them, that's stupid. So that's why I think ethics means a win-win-win scenario. So for you, other people, and I. I'll wrap this up. So that's what I think. It's like a branch of, well, anyways, with like the scenario I was thinking of was like the police, they steal our money through, or the government through taxation. That's immoral, but they do build roads. I mean, probably, I wouldn't even say that's ethical because it's fucking stolen money. Anyways, ethics is the branch of philosophy of morality, and it's like above the foundation of morals. And the good way Joe Murray put it was, first of all, prayers to Joe Murray. Hope he's doing better. I heard he was feeling ill, so good energy towards him. But I watched a video of his talking about ethics, how we need to understand this is, for example, I see a bum in the street and I could initiate a conversation with him, and then that would be ethical. Maybe give him something to eat. And then values, the way I see it is like, what's valuable to me? And that it's totally objective to me. And you touched on this, Rick. You said Mark Passio asked people what they value in life, and like people wouldn't say the truth. And I caught myself, that was not in my, because I filled out 13 questions to know what I value, and truth was not in one of those. So I fell for the same thing. But values do change, and that will be in there. But I'll pass it to Brandon.
Thank you. One ways that I wanted to approach this topic was not necessarily from a mere words or, from a grammar, in a sense, like a logical means, mythology and understanding the myths and how they wanted to bring about an understanding and symbolism and these concepts and these meanings in nature and aspects about ourselves. So I wanted to approach this from this way of thinking to try to get people to understand this concept of morality, of values, and of ethics. So one of the teachings that was taught about in many traditions was the teaching of two aspects in nature. One was considered the loving force. This was, personified and portrayed in the goddess of Isis, or Hamayat, or many of the feminine tradition terms. And the same goddess, the same aspect of nature, would also have a counterpart, and this was Ishvet, or the form of Nemesis. Same aspect of nature, just different forms, different versions of how objective reality is going to give us the same experience back that we are putting into it. So to truly understand this, you really have to grasp the concept of also the individual, and there is some form of objective reality, and these two forms are always interacted in time. So we are always taking in information, and we're always putting that information back out in the form of action. So in understanding these two concepts are in the Mayat form, because she represented truth, she represented morality, she represented harmony, she represented um, knowing her laws, knowing the way, knowing concord, this aspect of love and being open to receive. Because if we understood that on an individual level, then we could start to perceive objective reality correctly. Because if you perceive objective reality incorrectly, what is that going to do for your own understanding? What is that going to do for your own means of coming to understand the objective world? If that is diluted, or if it's controlled, or if it's obfuscated, or if it's distorted, how can you come to understand what is true versus how you will not come to understand what is false? So this myth was used as a story to try to get people to expand their way of thinking, to see things in the whole, and understanding, that there are consequences for our species, and also understand that you are that form of chaos. You are that microcosm putting things back out into the world. And there is a correspondence, a correlation in the whole and in the individual. So in this teachings of Mayat, if you understood the importance of truth and you align to her teachings, which were the teachings of morality, about, people say balance, but I like to say the form harmony, because when you think of it, it's a pattern, it's a tone. So you harmonize with it, you integrate with it to become one. To where if you're talking about just balance, we can never really be on the same plane of natural law. Natural law and morality will always be above us. So it's up to us to integrate that teaching, to harmonize with that teaching. Then by way, we start to harmonize more with the objective reality, because the objective reality is objective truth, because it's all things that have ever existed, all things that have occurred, and things that are occurring now. So if we do not have that basic understanding, if that means is blocked off, then we cannot come to harmonize or even understand the objective world. So in these teachings, they would help you cognize and imagine things from a more holistic, right brain approach. That way you can see and measure things. That also too, if we take in Mayat's counterpart, which was Ishvet, her chaotic form, her destructive form, this comes in the form from the receiving. We're going to receive those same forms that we put back out. Keyword free will. It's the choice. You get to choose between Mayat, or you get to choose between Hel Ishvet, based on your ignorance, on harmonizing with the objective world, which is to harmonize with the truth. So you are harmonizing with illusions. You are harmonizing with untruths. So then therefore you have a blurred way of how objective reality works. So then therefore you can't even take in objective information. So you can't even come to an understanding of that which is true and that which is false. So then therefore you would get Ishvet, because you would buy into more and more bullshit illusions. You would buy into things like moral relativism. You will buy into forms of external authority, because you are in ignorance, because you don't understand how to interpret and come to an understanding of these objective things, but you don't know how to perceive them correctly. And that's what this myth was about, is understanding how to perceive correctly, understanding how to take in this information correctly. And truth is hell important, because if you believe that there is no truth, then you will always come to a subjective form of retardation or an inaccurate form of perceiving the objective world. It will never ever be able to blend, because you would just fall into perception is everything. Perception, then you can start to create anything. You can start to change the definition of words. You lose sight of meaning, and meaning is what gives power. And this gets into what Chris talked about, is we have to understand the words that we use, because the words are the grammar, and then this gets back into the trivium, is learning how to structure our grammar correctly. You have letters, you have spelling, then you have words. Well, you put those words back out. If you can control those words, then you can control the way people are going to perceive her reality, since those words are pretty much a reflection or reference of her reality, just like symbols. You give them an ignorant version of the understanding of symbols, therefore they can never really come to an understanding of the symbolic nature of objective reality and ourselves. So that's what this mythology was supposed to be about. And these two teachings was teaching us that there is an objective world and there is a subjective experience, and we have to harmonize our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions with the correct moral right knowledge in order to get the correct moral right return in the collective, because we are always putting things back out into reality. We're always creating. Are we going to create consciously or subconsciously? What is the rhetoric going to be? What is the aesthetic going to be? What is the output going to be? And you can measure that. Is our output, is our aesthetics based in beauty? Is it based in anything good? Or is it based in shit? Is it based in tyranny? We are losing beauty. We are losing creativity. So that's a reflection of the third stage in the trivium. What we are fashioning, what we are creating. So then therefore our grammar, the knowledge that we are taking in, how we are perceiving it, is inaccurate. That are not coming to a logical, understanding. So therefore we will never ever get to an understanding of morality if we can't even get to an understanding of how to discern what's truth and what's false.
Yeah. If everything's completely relative, then there's no commonality, and when we look at, were you done, Brandon, with your
Yeah.
thought process there? Yeah. When we look at, like I said, the root understanding of just the word morality by itself, it's basically, coming from this custom or habit, right? And, there's been different people and times all through history where people have kind of landed differently on how they want to interpret the customs and habits of their nation or their set of people. And the trouble with this is, I thought of like muddying the waters. We're all living in this fish tank that we call the earth, and you can imagine a fish tank where the water's really clear and we're able to clearly see and define things around us because it's a clean area. And then you can imagine another fish tank that has not been taken care of well, and the water's all muddy and it's hard to see what's going on and it's hard to gain clarity. And I think that's more the realm that we're living in, where a word like morality and is so confusing to people. What I've noticed more often than not, kind of like the word spirituality, that morality gets tossed in with cultural religions. And for some people, it's more convenient to sort of subcategorize that term as being, oh, that only has to do with religious people. I don't need to worry about that, right? But really what it is just a base commonality. And I think, people want to argue about these words and how they're being used. It helps to just establish up front with who you're talking to. What do you mean? What do we mean in this conversation? So for me, for the sake of this conversation, morality means that which pertains to principles, and principles are the source, the foundation, right? I did a little research on a man named Immanuel Kant, famous philosopher, big time philosopher in history. His quote I brought is, "Morality is not the doctrine of how we make ourselves happy, but how we make ourselves worthy of happiness." Right? So doing the right thing doesn't always make you happy. Sometimes it's a sacrifice, but to feel worthy, you know, it really comes down to what we do with our time. And so, um, having a clear understanding of what we know is right and wrong, um, it takes some experience in life. Like it takes some learning. We have to train our children as they grow up. That's right, that's wrong. And then our children have to learn these lessons as they play with each other, and you punch your friend, you realize, oh, he's crying. I didn't mean to hurt him. I was just playing. And that's how we build our empathy. And that's how we start to understand the boundaries between us and other people. And we sort of, over time, we build this understanding of what works and doesn't work well, what's right and not right. And this is based on our experience, right? And so something really important that I'm discovering in Kant's work is he brings up this term called a priori. And what he means by a priori is basically before experience, prior to, right? Prior to experiencing a thing, the thing already exists is the point basically here. So you're not, when someone does something bad to someone else, they didn't create the idea of bad, right? There's already, the idea of bad was already in the ether, already in the universe, the first person that did something bad, because the other person then, that's what he calls a posteriori, after posteriori, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but after you experience the effect of something, then you can confirm, yeah, that was bad. That hurt. You punched me, that hurt, right? And so I think it's important to understand that there are things that exist before we experience them. And so morality, if we look at it objectively, what we're talking about is the general consensus for all beings in all places. What is the most common denominator that we can possibly find and agree on? And I think that's where Mark has done such a brilliant job with listing the transgressions, right? The different types of stealing that we do is one way to define harm, right? And I can see where in different times in history, in different places, people probably have defined these things a little bit differently. There's some nuances, right? And there's some gray areas the further we get from the center of the target, which is objective morality. And that's this a priori idea that there's something that already exists in universe that comes from the great intelligence, that comes from the divine. That's what we call our conscience, where we're able to discover what's good and what's not good. And you can't discover something that didn't already exist. It's not good because you decided it was good. It's good because you discovered, oh, that's how it worked out, the consequences. So I think, like, I agree with what Derek said, that morality is the base structure of what we're working from, the commonality that we can all see. Like, obviously you shouldn't rape children, like, who wants to make that argument that that's good? That's just silly, right? There's some things that we can find that are very common across the board. All religions see them too. You want to disagree with them or not, but they all do agree with certain base. Other people, you want to other people to be treated the way you want to be treated. You want to be treated the way everybody else should be treated. You want to find some commonality, and that's why we have this idea of morality. And the more objective we can be about it, the closer we can get to the divine. And, we can't get there 100%, but we can agree on some pretty basic things, and that's what we're getting at with this stuff. So when we agree on these basic principles, these things that are before us and outside of us objectively, the closer we can get to that by having these discussions, by defining these words, then we can kind of figure out how we ethically make decisions in our life. And that's where I feel like ethics comes in. It's the application It's how we weave it into the particular things we're doing in our life. That's why, like you said, businesses have codes of ethics. Nurses have their own code of ethics. Engineers have a code of ethics. These are people's um, extrapolation from morality. How do I actually express it in my life? That's where we form ethics. But ethics is strictly dealing with morality, which is strictly dealing with principles. That's the way I like to explain it because it would make sense. And I even drew a little graph, like a Venn diagram. And Venn's this dude from the 80s who came up with this way to conceptualize ideas by using circles within circles and circles that overlap one another. And I find it to be a good way to think through these thought processes. So when I drew morality and then I drew ethics, I realized that in my interpretation here, ethics is always an aspect of morality. If the ethics aren't attached to morality, if they don't come from morality, it's not really ethical, you know? And so values, on the other hand, we can value things that are good or bad. One person might value destroying the town next to them because it creates more farmland, right? Now that's not what we call good values, because that word does get a little tricky. People use it interchangeably with ethics and morality. So, we have to be careful and define up front what we mean when we use these words, is all I'm saying. And the ultimate application and reality of how this translates into your everyday life is if you have a good, clear, like I said, you can see what's right and wrong and you're clear on it, then you can guide yourself into making decisions that are in alignment with that clear vision of what's good and bad. And so then you can create a code of ethics that makes sense. And then what you do with your time in your day-to-day life is what you value. And so if you value stealing from people and you spend all your time stealing from people, that's what you're doing with your time. You're becoming less and less moral, and you're bringing more immorality into the world. Whereas if you value learning and teaching about truth or seeking freedom, then you're having the discussions we're having, where you're trying to work out the details on this stuff and then explain it in a way where it's simple enough that other people can agree. And that's really what it comes down to, is finding a way to find the common denominator of what's right for all people, so we don't keep leading ourselves into worse forms of slavery, which has been happening all through history. So I think we made the rounds. I think we're
Awesome.
back to Derek, unless somebody else wanted to jump in.
Yeah, does anyone want to jump in? I got some good stuff to follow up with you, Chris. If anyone's got something hot off, they want to pull off the press of their chest. But yeah, Brandon, I love the fact you brought up Mayotte. Man, that was awesome. But so here's an interesting thing. Going back to Chris, what you're talking about, and all right, so we can look to the past and look at certain times throughout history of what people thought were ethical at that time, and we run that through the trivium. I mean, it's not just about the who, what, where, when, why, and how, but also looking at the logical fallacies and how that plays out today, and how people justify certain actions that are in the wrong, that are immoral, but they might think it's actually ethical because at a certain time, maybe owning slaves was ethical, or cannibalism was ethical, or all these different things that could be tribal or whatever, because just they're man-made things that are not necessarily aligned to natural law, objective morality. So when people, but Chris, I do agree with you on how you broke that down. It's just a shame how, you know what I mean, people are gonna claim something is ethical when it's not, unfortunately. So yeah, that's a good way to take it to the trivium as far as looking at logical fallacies. People today are gonna appeal to tradition, past, appeal to authority, when a lot of authority out in the world is immoral. These false figures of authority claiming ownership over our property and trying to mandate some fucking bullshit that's claiming ownership over our bodies, telling us what the fuck we can or cannot do, what we can put into our bodies, and if we have to have certain things just to go back to work, whatever the hell, since the dawning of the Rona, the lockstep bullshit. But what was I gonna say? pick a card. So yeah, I picked out some cards to represent this one's for values. The Knight of Pentacles, Earth element sign, and just yeah, it's on the minor arcana, and I picked this because the values are more of applied to the individual the most, and that seems to be the most subjective, right? So yeah, it's basically he's got a property of Earth in his hand. How does he value that? What is he gonna do to protect that? And all that jazz. And going back to what you mentioned, because I was hesitant to pull the major arcana card for the courage or strength card. And Chris, when you mentioned the definition, or I don't know if it was the etymology of values, it talked about strength. So that actually came to mind just without even looking at the definition. I was like, oh, well, that's cool. So yeah,
value. The etymology was strength or worth. That's correct.
Yeah, so people like, what are you worth, man? Like, and going back to the dating, isn't it funny how like today you hear like, oh, I'm a high value man or high value woman and all that stuff. But how many of these people actually value truth as their top 3? That kind of shit, eternal principles, axioms of fucking truth that goes beyond any man-made stuff going on, that just governs reality 24/7. And if we're not aligned to that, we're not in harmony, as Brandon spoke about. It's unfortunate. So yeah, man, keeping it light as a feather is the way to go, yo. So the ethics, you hear a lot about that with the religion. I had that initially, the Hierophant's card. I was really hesitant on saying that initially in my first round, but yeah, it is a false authority figurehead, right? Punk ass popes and shit. But I also had the still within the minor arcana, just the King of Swords, and because a lot of times we can over intellectualize things and be too imbalanced on the left brain of trying to over rationalize how man's behavior applies to natural law in a sense. So yeah, over time, it's been trial and error, Chris, like you said, and today we're so fortunate to learn from so many mistakes of the past, but how many times is humanity still putting their hand on the fucking burning stove and shit like that, right? So yeah, and then boom, Brandon, nice t-shirt, brother. Representing Mayats, this is objective morality right here, centered perfectly between the pillars of enlightenment, self-defense principle, masculine, and care with the feminine, with that sword of truth. And yeah, the king's got it, but he ain't that on that justice card level. But yeah, that's just something for folks to glean on. Anything else right now? No, y'all can go. Anyone?
I'll take
Pass
it.
it off.
If yeah. When we're talking about morality, we are talking about a word that has been associated or, describing what our behaviors are. Of course, correct and incorrect. So in order to understand this, there has to be a level of knowledge, so there has to be some level of discernment. There has to be some level of judgment. And that's the thing is when we talk about morality, if it is a word that is associated with action and behaviors, then it also has to come from, like the mental structure. So there needs to be knowledge. There needs to be some form of discernment. There needs to be some form of judgment. Because if you take the discernment, if you take the judgment away, then you just have input, output. There is no processing. So you can't take away that middle part of the trivium process, because then there is no logic, there is no understanding. Then you just produce little order following robots, sort of like we see today. So in this judgment, in this discernment, we have to take in this knowledge that we take in from our senses, being able to perceive. And of course, you can take it in intuitively, so that comes down to understanding what preferences are too, because we are also told that preferences are really what morals are, but preferences are just a way for us to prefer things because our preferences are going to be based on our perception. So that's coming from this subjective way of trying to understand a reality, but you're doing it from an incorrect way. So that's why they put a lot of emphasis on just perceiving something is not really judgment. You're not really making a discernment. Perception is just taking in the information, but it hasn't been broken down. It hasn't been filtered. It hasn't been, it hasn't been added to. It hasn't been taken hell away from. It hasn't been gone through those parts of the logical fallacies. It hasn't gone through the thinking and all of the stuff that goes in the logic form. So perception is that key part of us taking in the information. So again, it's important that we don't let that key point of perception get controlled by external influences. Because once that perception gets controlled by external influences by way of religion, by way of government, then that's going to retard, that's going to water down or muddy our lens to take in information. They give you that satanic thought. They give you a limited form of what is possible. They give you a limited form of what you can create. They give you a limited form of what you are or what you can be. That's controlling your perception. Then therefore, you try to make judgment based off that incorrect version of your perception because you was given incorrect data. You was giving limited sets of data. So they controlled your grammar. Hell, again, it goes back to the controlling of words, controlling of grammar, going to control our perception. You control the way people communicate because we are communicating all the time. Every relationship is going to be based on some form of communication. We're taking in external stimuli. We are putting out actions. That's all a form of communication. Hell, rather it's through the senses or through the intuitive heart. So that's all going to be on the form of her relationship. So perceiving, taking in information correctly, that is the key thing here. Is we have to do well in our grammar because we will never ever get to that judgment, that logic point. Because that's what morality is. It's coming to this understanding. And you think it for yourself to say, hey, is this action that I am about to take? That's using that judgment to say, hey, am I about to engage in wrong behavior because I have recognized a pattern that's going to come from the consequences of that wrong behavior? That's where the judgment is. You can recognize the pattern that's going to come because that behavior always is going to manifest that same pattern. That's you making that judgment. That's you making that discernment. That's the free will choice. That's where people's perception is skewed because they've gotten people to buy into inaccurate, definitions. And inaccurate definitions are going to create an inaccurate version of your constructed reality. Because then you are going to have inaccurate understanding of truth because truth is the objective reality. Then you buy into lies. So having that judgment is what's going to get us to that morality, being able to think. We can't leave out thinking, and that logical point, that logical mindset, because that's how we're going to always become more knowers or dive deeper and deeper into knowledge. That's the whole purpose of consciousness. You can keep going deeper and deeper and deeper because consciousness is infinite. Well, what we can come to know and understand is infinite. So coming to integrate objective reality, the more and more we do that, then the more and more we come to an understanding of truth. So we have to have that judgment, but our judgment is being controlled by our perceptions. And therefore, people can never even get to that basic understanding, and they don't even take in the grammar, because that's what the trivium is there for, is for us to be able to come to an understanding, or at least come to a cognition of what's true and what's false. And if we always buy into falsities, we will never ever come to know what's true. So we can't even communicate anything to anybody, because you will have an incorrect understanding in communicating your reality. Because you can just say, oh, well, your definition is different than mine. So how can you harmonize? That's that tone, of harmonization, is through the language, because that's how we're being controlled. The mind, the honey mouth, the sorcerer, he's good with his rhetoric. He's mastered the rhetoric. He's seductive, like the snake, good with that freaking verbal judo. If you're good with, speech, and you can construct language, man, you can damn near seduce anybody, because you can you can create a false reality and get them to buy into it, because you can make it sound so seductive, create this illusion in someone's mind, and then they buy into it. That's the seductive, because you lack the judgment to discern the correct information.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got me thinking, Brandon, about the police and how people value the police mostly and hold them in high regards, and that's their perception of them. But really, America was founded in fuck the police, right? Or our right to defend ourselves against them. Standing armies that if that ever came back into reality, that we would have the right to defend ourselves against them. But yet, instead, you know, they're the ones. They have a code of ethics, and they are enforcing unethical laws, right? And but people like most people are gonna hear me say this, they're gonna be like, "That's so fucked up to say shit about the cops," But that's really one of the biggest perceptions that I think needs to be judged. Like that's what I was getting from what you were saying, to really think about, like really process the reality of what they represent, that they are order followers for the government. And when it comes down to it, you know, they're not your brother, because they won't listen. They'll listen to the bad guys. And um like, but they're so valued. So, same thing with the military. And just our culture, it's very high esteem, these organizations, and they do have their ethics. And that's just something I'll put out there, for someone to think about how highly they value these people who will ultimately, when it comes down to it, aren't on your side, right? But I'll pass it to Rick.
I'm just taking in what you guys are saying. It's really, and Brandon, you guys kind of said it. Brandon said it perfect. That's what I was going to kind of say, was with information. It's so important with so much information out there to make sure you're taking in the correct information. And I always think of and then taking it in and running it through the whole trivia method, because that's so important, I think. And that's the problem. I truly think I would be really curious if you could go and just randomly start pulling people off the street and just hit them on the spot and say, like, do you think that you're ethical? Do you think you have morality? Are your values right? I think most people would, in their mind, would say they are. And we just know that's not the case. But I think just because of lack of not taking in the correct information, that's why they would think that way. I would be really curious. I might do that just to see what people say. Because I would think most people would think that they're living that way and they're living a good way. And so I'm just curious and to see what they would think and what they would say. But I think it's taking in this correct information and all the things that we're discussing, that's when you do this is when you are armed to do the work on yourself. And then that's when you start asking yourself the tough questions that we talk about. I think it's just so important. It really comes down to getting the correct information in and processing it and doing the whole process, because I think it's just with being flooded with so much information more now than ever, that I think it's got people like we're kind of touching on it. All of us is that people are kind of all over the place, and they're not even sure of definitions. They're not sure what they really mean, and so it's really interesting. So I think that's what I'll end with. I think that just make sure you're taking in the correct information is really important.
I guess I'll go because I have to speak because I'm part of this group. Good stuff, Crypt. Shit, I mean, there's just a lot to say, but I'm going to just touch on what I said last, which the values, I put health over the truth, but the first step, right, is believe that there's truth. So, okay, I believe in the truth. And then the thing Mark says is that people fear that there's such a thing as absolute truth. And that's where I see the world is at chaos because they're in fear. And I was in fear too. And that obscures your perception, and then you're not able to align it to the truth. So you're not able to receive the correct information, like Brandon was saying. So you're just dead at Jump Street. But once you start aligning yourself to the truth, at least for myself, I can see what is real. And I picture it like two people are looking at a mountain. One is actually like at the mountain, and he sees things that the other person who's far away from the mountain doesn't. Until you get closer, then you can actually see the details. And then Brandon touched on discernment, which is fucking huge. Because I'm looking at it like Mark says, is a computer good or evil, right? And it's like neither. It's programmable. So it's like if you just fucking put a ton of information on it, like how the fuck is it supposed to run? You're supposed to organize it, right? And then it'll run according to how you want it to run. So that's why that part is super huge. And then acting on it, it's funny because as I was in the Navy, the saying was honor, courage, and commitment. And I want to apply that to my life for sure, because I need honor, not like Barack Obama, right? To honor my word. And then what is the other one? Courage. Have the courage to speak out. And I have some notes which I'll share here. I'm going to just harp on morality because that's the most important thing. Yeah, let me touch my notes. From What on Earth is Happening, episode 36. Let's see. People's belief in government, moral relativism, that's the slippery slope to social Darwinism and a police state. Police hate society. I don't know where I was going there. Anyways, yeah. First, it's all about the principles, and yeah, having the courage to speak up. Because Mark was saying that people like have fear and they lack courage, and that's why they're not speaking out. But that's the solution, to speak out, talk about morality, and then embed it in people's subconscious, plant that seed, and then slowly keep just saying the truth, right? It's like you got to combat the lie. The truth is more powerful than the lie. It's real. And then it will flourish. Hopefully, that's the idea. But I think why I value truth is because Is there such a thing that we can lose? I'll say yes, but the truth will remain regardless if we exist or not. So really, the truth is the most important. And then I'll say I value freedom for all. And then morality is how we get there based on principles. And then ethics is the next step, like how we treat each other, right? And you're right. I learned so much from just being here because I want to say I know that ethics are moral, and that's correct. And yeah, I guess I'll just talk about solutions, which is teach the young, not perpetuate this cycle of abuse and what's it called? Have that conflict resolution and just teach the truth. I'll pass it to whoever wants to go next.
I'm assuming we're going to be wrapping down soon. So I'm going to say my last little bits. We can talk about morality and ethics and, values all day, but we have to get back to basic understanding. And if people are trying to come to an understanding of what we're saying based off their own incorrect definitions, that's going to lead to an inaccurate or more resistance. So when we are doing these talks or when you're talking with people, you do have to break down your words. You do have to come with, with meaning and etymology to get them to visualize and conceptualize what you are saying by way of being correct. You see, correctness in this world is the most important thing. And I don't mean like a form of ego, correctness. I mean correctness that you have knowledge and you have aligned your perception to that knowledge. Therefore, you are correct because therefore you are harmonized with truth. So how do we get there? And that's what I'm saying is if people have these inaccurate meaning of definition, we've got to get them to break those inaccurate definitions down first, then understanding the correct, definition, then they can start to rebuild their own means of thinking. That's why I've always said that you have to go through this process. You have to run this stuff through the trivium process because that's when you start to break down and get a better understanding and clarity and meaning of this objective experience that we are all sharing from your individual perception. And the trivium is so important because if we continue to try to create unconsciously, that means we don't know how to take in and come to an understanding of truth, then we are going to reap these unwanted negative health consequences. So we have to get back to this understanding of the trivium process. That's pretty much the that's the manifestation right there. There's always these three forms of a manifestation. How the three. There's always the input, there's always the processing, and there's always the output. That's how we take in energy. Like we have to get back to understanding ourselves and also understanding this objective reality, because without the harmonization, without the integration, we will always be forever controlled. And trauma, that which splits, that which wounds, that's what breaks that connection. And that's why we live in this traumatic world. So as long as that trauma continues, it will always cut off our ability to correctly discern and understand objective reality. That's why they have built this environment, this environment that's just based on trauma, based on suffering. That way we can't come to an understanding of objective reality and we can't harmonize with it. Therefore, we will always continue to be at war with ourselves. So we have to get back to literally knowing how to discern truth from falsehood and using the trivium and teaching this, because without this knowledge, we will never ever get back to an understanding of morality, right and wrong, because we will forever be, trying to understand stuff from our subjective, perceptualized, inaccurate, wrong definitions. And that's why they are changing definitions again, because you change definitions, you can change the way people think, because you can change the way they communicate, convey, and construct and decode reality. So you're saying we can control the truth by changing, her definitions. Because if you've constructed your, her worldview on this definition and you change it, then that's going to create what? A schism. Because then you have to go back and change those thought forms and change those neurological pathways. So all this takes time. This really does take time. Hell, doing the full tripping process takes time, and you'll see it back out because hell again, this is how you know someone doesn't really know, because they're not engaged in putting the information back out there. Because the rhetoric part and putting it back out there in the form of communication, that's how we start to push the pendulum swing in our favor. So the more people who are putting this information back out in the form of rhetoric, in in the form of output, that's their art, that's their craft. So the more and more people that are going to do that, you're going to see more of a beauty, more of an aesthetic. And then people are going to be taking that and taking it in the form of grammar. So it is about numbers. It is about more people, doing this, because the more people engage in its output, then we can, shift the tide. So that's how you know that people don't really know, because they're not putting it back out in the form of output. They're not engaged in the full method of the trivium. It's not two out of three steps, because it always gets you 0.66. You need all three steps in that correct order. Then you got some schools that are putting the logic part last. How they're going what input, how rhetoric, how logic, how they're going, how input, how output processing. It's like, what kind of reality is that going to, how leave you in? So we have to get back to a true understanding of the trivium and why it was so important to free our minds and come to an understanding of truth by being able to discern truth from falsehoods. And it's an extenuous process that you should be constantly going through, because you're vetting out, um, you're vetting out falsities, and you're vetting out, how contradictions. So it's something that's really tough, because it does take time. So we have to get back to that.
Ooh, Chris, were you gonna jump on, or
Go ahead, Derek.
All right, cool. Because Brennan, to tag on with the trivium, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and for me, I find a trine within the understanding, because there's that inner overstanding through that process. If we really want to get shit down and really refine our rhetoric, I think that's a really great way to go. And obviously take it back into gathering more grammar and all that jazz. But as far as Brandon, it's very important, the integration, and that is that process as well, and really get integrating, because we've heard a lot of lips flapping, or lip servicing, virtue signaling about certain things, and people act like they know whatever, but it's not necessarily congruent and consistent with their behaviors sometimes, right? So if we really want to walk the fucking talk, walk it properly. I wanted to, well, actually, because that makes a good segue, because for me, awakened, activated individual is really operating from their hearts, that awakened heart chakra. And for me, that also kind of represents, in a sense, that moral compass, because when it's really turning and oscillating, in alignment with natural law, cosmic law, I mean, it's like kind of how we're supposed to be kind of just born with these codes of consciousness, that you can just, it's an awakened intuitive feeling as well. And that goes into that divine feminine, which actually meant to say, like the masculine is self-defense, feminine is non-aggression principle. And too much of humanity has too much yang up in their thing. So it's that, it's the contrary to the non-aggressive principle, right? But yeah, and yeah, with the Hierophants as well, since I'm on it, I meant to say, because yeah, y'all touched on it, Jim and Chris and Rick, as far as how people equate ethics to beliefs and all this stuff. And if we're really going to be 100% and call a spade, belief is the enemy, if you will, of knowledge and truth. So I wanted to share another moral compass, and I forget what this is. I don't know if it's Buddha or something, like the Eightfold Path or something like that, regarding right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, right mindfulness. And you could break that down and see how the trivium plays into that, with the three forms of human expression that correlate with that threefold path, and to a good degree. I forget, I did this years ago. It was a cool graph. But anyways, as far as yeah, right action, that's the rhetoric, right? Right concentration, if you will, is right thought, which goes into mentalism. Yeah, I'm reaching a little bit, but no. But these are the things that will keep us in a line to objective morality. Just like do no fucking harm. It ain't that hard. It's like pretty simple. And you can take it to, yeah, like certain religious doctrines have certain things, like the golden rule. Christy mentioned that. Another thing that I liked was, it's just called the Universal Moral Code by Kent M. Keith. Do no harm. Do not do to others what you would not do like them to do to you. Do not lie. Do not steal. Do not cheat. Do not falsely accuse others. Do not commit adultery. Do not commit incest. Do not physically or verbally abuse others. Do not murder, obviously. Do not destroy the natural environment upon which we all life depends on. And but yeah, we can do good and have positive affirmations, and that kind of plays into the 42 ideals of Mayat and the affirmations of Mayat as well. Those fall in line with what we're talking about in this as well. So yeah, do to others what you would like them to do to you. Be honest and fair. Be generous. Be faithful to your family and friends. Take care of your children when they are young. Take care of your parents when they're old. Take care of those who connect. Take care of themselves. Did I mess that up? Whatever. Be kind to strangers. Respect all life. Protect the natural environment upon which all life depends. Easier said than done, right, guys? But yes. Yeah. Keep them scales balanced, light as a feather, So yeah. That's what I got. Rick was cracking, man. I know you've been thinking. Oh.
Good, man. I can't add anything else. You guys covered everything. It's awesome.
Jim, did you have last words?
Yeah, not too much. Just thanks for all you guys' input, and yeah, it's a tricky situation, but if anything, I think what we really want people to understand that morality is objective, and I know that's not something that's easily acceptable. And one of the best place to get your head around it is Mark Passio's work. That's where I, began the processing of that, and it's just basically based in, do no harm. And it's sad to me that there's like philosophers who want to debate, that morality isn't universal, and that it just that's the ethics, the philosophy of morality. It's like it almost seems like that confused me too, but I won't really get too much into it. It's like if morality is universal, then there isn't so much to philosophize about, But um the just fucking care. I don't want to curse. I don't know why I'm cursing, but it's basically if you're not um if you're defending morality objective, it's just you don't care, and that sucks. So that's it for me.
Jim, one thing that you guys had a pretty Jerry had a neat conversation with Brandon and some other folks about objective morality. And after listening to that conversation, and another couple conversations I've had recently, it has occurred to me that one of the confusions that people have is that, like Brandon was just saying, he was explaining this really well. We are experiencing reality from our subjective lens. So, but I think one of the things that's being left out is we have this mind that has an incredible ability to, imagine and imagine things even outside of reality. We can come up with an idea of a thing that doesn't even exist in reality yet, and that's one of the amazing gifts from the universe to us, is that we can imagine, even feel things that aren't even real. And so in that space, in that freedom, there is the ability, like Brandon was saying, to think wrong thoughts and things that aren't productive, that don't work out well for us or anyone else. And that's what makes them wrong. Not, we're saying, yes, they are inherently wrong, but why is the important question. What's the commonality? Why is because all of life is about relationships. We receive happiness, feelings, all based on what we do to each other and what other people do to us. That's our primary thing in life. And that's why I would say morality is the principal ingredient of life. Morality and truth are very much the same thing. When we do an action in the world, we find out through the consequences what's the reality of how that acts itself out in the world. So, just to finish my thoughts, I have this slide and I drew a picture of a target. And I would propose to you, for your clarity of thinking, if you think about a target as being morality, that's what we're shooting for, is to be good people, right? And when you're shooting an arrow, that's like your actions you do in the world. I wrote, our practice in life is to experience the consequences of actions. Through this practice, we learn how to be in balance, to do what is best, right, and good, to seek harmony and wholeness to the best of our ability within what we got, right? So our subjective relationship to moral truth is like the arrows we shoot in life. We're experimenting, we're trying things. We're not always 100% right. Sometimes we hit the mark and sometimes we're off the mark. You got to get close and like really inspect at the target to see how close you were. And I think about those lines on the target, those are kind of like our codes of ethics. We draw like a color so we can zoom in closer to the morality, which is the objective morality would be the very tiny, tiny spot right in the middle that's super fucking hard to hit. And it's kind of hard to understand too, because there's a lot of gray area out around it and people want to muddy the waters with all these words that confuse us. So morality is the target. That's what we're doing here in life, is we're testing out our expressions of actions and seeing how reality tells us we're doing in terms of good or bad. And if we're all living in a state of slavery, that's how we know we're not making enough moral decisions as a whole. And that's the experience we're having. There's a lot of suffering and pain and slavery in the world, so we can be sure that there's not enough moral centered action and understanding of that one target objective morality spot, which we can understand with our minds, especially if we work together and we work diligently. even though we are all in our subjective experiences, we can agree on things. We can use numbers and get the same results in our mathematical equations. We can look at DNA and we can look at experiments of water, and we can see the geometric expression of these feelings and musical notes and vibrations. And these have feelings attached to them. And all going through these feelings in life is how we learn. So what else is life about but morality? That's what we're here to learn. So I say, try to shoot for the center of the target, right? Don't just shoot willy-nilly, right? And through various relationships, we shoot our arrows of action. We put time into the things we value, and we cast our intention into the air like these arrows. And if we're doing that diligently and we're practicing and trying to get it to hit the target, the center of the target, we're going to come that much closer to a world that's not full of slavery, lies, rape, and killing. And so, that's how I wanted to end it. And thanks you guys for the great conversation and everybody's perspective. And trying to work through this was a difficult one for all of us, I know, because these words are, they've been muddied. Let's put it that way, because we live in an authoritarian world, and the rulers do want us to be confused about these concepts, so we don't get along well and overthrow them and gain our independence. So just keep that in mind. It's basic strategy. Divide and conquer, folks. Much love. Work on your morality. Be able to define what your code of ethics is, and put time and energy into the things you value based on your morals and principles. That's the way I put it.